Hey everyone, I wanted to tell you all about some mid lane technology that I have been using recently, which is the Shadow Flame Rush. So, for you guys that aren't aware, Mission, he's a mid laner in the PCS. I'm a caster for the PCS, which is how I saw this in the first place. Recently, in his match history, he's been going, and this is all in competitive by the way, he's been going chapter into Shadow Flame. So you can see it in games like this. He builds a chapter and then he completes Shadow Flame. And he's done this on a variety of different champs. Mostly, though, he's only played in terms of AP, Oriana, and Azir. The only other AP he's played is Silas, and obviously it's not really going to be that good on Silas. But on Mages, pretty much every game, he's been going chapter Shadow Flame, all split long. And you might be wondering, okay, why is that a thing? So Shadow Flame, the way it works is it gives more magic pen based on their HP. So the lower HP, their max HP. Actually, I believe it's, yeah, current HP. The lower current HP they have, the more magic pen that it's giving you. So earlier in the game, when people have less health, it's going to give you more magic pen. And obviously better against squishy targets. So basically what he does is he just tries to get Shadow Flame like really early into the game alongside, he gets tier 2 boots early, obviously. This case, Mercs for matchup, but if you can get Sorks, Chapter, Shadow Flame, or something early, that gives you a lot of magic pen and a lot of early game power. And so what he's been doing is he runs that alongside a page of just full early game. So basically, this is the kind of build, combined with the runes and the items, that's just going to give you the strongest 15 minutes that you can pretty much possibly have. And I think this is actually better in solo queue than it is in competitive, because in competitive, right, a lot of the time the game is going to go a bit longer, but in solo queue, even if the game does go longer, a lot of it will kind of be decided very early on in the game. So something I started trying, and feel free to look through his match history here. I believe there's a couple games where he didn't go it, but for the most part, like, yeah, he just takes the setup every game of, you get your chapter Shadow Flame. Sword shoots can come before or after, kind of depending on your base. He also did it this game on Azir, and this game was crazy. If I go to the summary here, he did some absurd amount of damage. You can see it's a 24-minute game. And he did 1660 DPM. Oh, you can't quite see it. 1660 DPM and 45% of his team's damage. So obviously, if the game is relatively short, it's going to be really, really strong because you're just going to be super strong before people get health, before people get MR and everything like that. So obviously, after seeing all that, I took it into solo queue and I did try it out on a fair few champs. I also tried it with a few different setups, and I'll kind of talk you through, I guess, like my thoughts after testing it and all that. So the first thing is it does do a lot of damage. I mean, if you can get this build and if you can make sure to fight early and like win your lane, it's really, really good, right? You're playing into it. Now, the, I guess, problems come from, it's pretty hard to do it if you have more than one AP champ on your team. So the problem is, like, obviously the flat magic pen is not as valuable if people come in with more MRs. So if like you're playing 2 AP on your team, it's much more likely that they get MR early, in Hex Drinkers, Mercs, or stuff like that. And they might build, more MR later as well. So it's much better if you are that solo AP. It is also quite hard to do if you're in a losing matchup or if you're falling behind. And the reason is because the components for Shadow Flame are not particularly easy to get. So the thing is, the two components, right? It's alternator and the rod. So the rod is really, really good. Obviously, just flat 60 AP, but it costs 1250 gold, which is quite a lot to get together in the early game. Your other choice is the alternator, and alternator is kind of a bait item. Like, it's fine, but it's not particularly good, and it also builds out of a ruby crystal. So unless you want the HP, which a lot of the time you don't, you're kind of building an item that just ultimately isn't that efficient and is kind of wasting some of the stats. Now, that can kind of depend, right? There are some matchups where the health actually might be useful, but for the most part, you would prefer to just have more HP. And it can, I guess, if you base and you buy something like Amtone Ruby, you can very easily get stuck on that, right? So especially if you're falling behind, you can end up in a real awkward spot where you don't have a mythic for a really long time, but you're also not getting your Shadow Flame early enough that the spike, it just doesn't really feel the same when you get to it. So my recommendation would be, if you do use this, try and do it if you're the solo AP, and also make sure you're getting ahead. So like probably have a winning matchup, and obviously try not to fall behind in the game itself. Some other things I tried is I tried doing it with a build that would just allow me to get Shadow Flame as quick as possible. So if you remember, I was talking about missions runes and stuff, that he would just take the full early game page. And so obviously I think that's good. You kind of build into the full early game. I did try it with going like first strike and boots and futures market, because what that would mean is that I would save a lot of gold on the way to Shadow Flame. And while I might not have, I guess, as great a spike on the way there, when I did hit the Shadow Flame, well, I'd hit it earlier. I might hit it a minute or two earlier. But ultimately, I decided this kind of wasn't worth it because you would end up getting bullied quite a bit for taking first strike. Now, maybe if you're in a lane where it doesn't actually matter, right? Like if you're in a matchup that you're going to win really hard no matter what, I could maybe see it then. But I think it's probably best, for the most part at least, that if you're playing this page, that you do kind of combine it with something that allows you to skirmish early. So like on the Azir, I remember Mission took it with Lethal Tempo. You could probably take it with like Hail of Blades. I probably wouldn't take it with Conqueror. You could probably take it with Aerie. And then when you're playing champs like Syndra, you would probably want something, you know, like Electrocute or Aerie or Comet or something. Just something that's going to allow you to both like win your lane and fight early, because that's what's kind of allowing you to get Shadow Flame. And it's also really nice if you can get kills on the way to Shadow Flame, because that's going to not only put you ahead, but of course it puts your opponent behind. So those are really important, I think. Another thing I tried is actually just rushing straight Shadow Flames, so just not even building Chapter. I tried this on Syndra originally because Syndra doesn't have many mana problems, right? You can take Mana Flow Band, you can go Biscuits, and like normally you don't go those on Syndra because you don't need mana with your Ludens. But I was thinking, okay, like what if I just take a couple mana runes and then just rush out a straight Shadow Flame? That kind of works well, but I would say it's not, I guess, the most efficient way to do it. And the main reason is that you're not actually getting use out of the Lost Chapter level up. Like, even though you have mana, a lot of the time in the early game, you can trade mana to get quite a lot with it. You know, you can just, like, throw all your mana on the wave, and your opponent can really struggle with that. You know, if they're getting shoved under tower and they can't push out. And sometimes, like, it would be nice, I guess, to have that Lost Chapter level up passive, and that way you're really strong for those fights. You've got, like, full mana and stuff like that. So it's probably something that I could experiment with more, and if you guys want to try it, be my guest. But ultimately, I found, like, it wasn't the greatest. But it could also depend on the champ, right? Like, there are some champs that could rush Shadow Flame that don't use mana at all. Like, I know one person mentioned to me Akali, and I think the problem with that would be not so much that it's bad on the champ, but more so that, again, we're kind of required to be ahead and to like win our lane and stuff like that because to get the Shadow Flame quickly, right? But the problem with Akali is that she typically loses lane. She can't easily take plates. So you're kind of going to just be reliant on picking up kills in the random fights, which, again, like, admittedly, Akali does pretty well, but it's kind of hard, I guess, to guarantee that you're getting that rod base. It's more likely as Akali that you're buying smaller components because you don't often get to choose your bases on Akali either. So that would just be my kind of thinking. I guess to kind of summarize it all together, I think if you do want to do it, it's when you're playing like an early game champ, or not even an early game champ, when you've got like a winning lane and you know you can get ahead early, you just take the full early game page, rush Chapter Shadow Flame, and that's really good. And also, if you're solo AP, it's a lot better. So that's kind of my thoughts on it, and hopefully you appreciate this kind of video. Again, it's just, it was more like an update rather than anything, and if you want, I guess, more info on it, I just check Mission's match history, and you can kind of look into how he played it, but yeah, I think that'll be mostly it. Otherwise, you can come ask me on my stream. I'm more likely to answer stuff on stream, of course, than YouTube comments. I've been too lazy, honestly, to respond to YouTube comments, so you might find it better there. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time.